right, good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Love, and welcome to the Conversation Without Borders here at the Love Law Firm. We have our paralegal, Julie Hand, with us today. I'm really excited about this conversation we're going to be having. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. We're going to discuss all the changes that the Trump administration has done with immigration, or at least as many of the changes we can. We only have a little bit of time. We're trying to fit all this in. But thanks again for joining us. If you want to reach us, loveimmigration.com is the website. Esta charla está en inglés. Vamos a hacer otra charla en español como las 3 de la tarde. Regresamos pronto. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Julie, how's everything going today?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
And so what are some of the topics we're going to be discussing today?
Okay, so we'll be covering a lot of different things that have happened in the past couple of years, but mostly Daca, TPS, and removal.
Mm-hmm. And here at the Love Law Firm, we only handle immigration cases, so give us a call, 205-323-8727. We're happy to answer any questions you have about immigration. So, Jill, let's get started.
Okay, so we'll start in 2017. First thing, obviously, when Trump became president. So, what's happened?
Well, really,
since then?
A lot has happened since then. The first thing, as we know, there were a lot of promises that Trump made during the campaign before he became president about immigration. And the first one that we're going to talk about is extreme vetting. So the idea of extreme vetting really has it's affected a lot of different areas of immigration. One of them is when people are applying for visas to come into the U.S., that process is taking a lot longer. There was already vetting as one of the big things that when Trump talked about immigration bothered me a little bit because there's already a lot of scrutiny, a long process, fingerprints and all that everyone goes through in order to come to the U.S. So the extreme vetting is kind of a vague term. Doesn't really mean a whole lot except for the fact that they're requiring more interviews than they used to, both for trying to come into the U.S. as well as trying to become a permanent resident. And that's led to immigration cases taking longer and longer. And we're going to go into a little bit more into some other reasons why immigration cases are taking longer.
Right. Okay.
So another one is expedited removals. That one and the next one, if you want to go ahead and hit that one, Julie, they kind of go hand in hand. Expedited removals is the process by which someone can be removed quickly from the U.S., oftentimes without a hearing. And so that's a process by which, especially in cases of when someone is just arriving to the U.S., so expanding the definition of an arriving immigrant is a big deal because it used to just happen when someone was stopped at the border. Let's talk about the border with the U.S. and Mexico. If someone is stopped there, oftentimes they can be removed quickly. It is a deportation, but it happens very fast. And one reason why that's changed is because the Trump administration has broadened the definition, or it did back in 2017, the definition of an arriving immigrant. So really anyone who within 200 miles of any U.S. border, and so that's a lot bigger. That's a lot more of the country than what was considered an arriving immigrant earlier. So that's led to more people being put into removal, and a lot of people being removed without a hearing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So the next topic, which has been a big discussion, is the border wall. Now, not much has really happened with this because $50 billion or whatever the most recent estimate is a lot of money. And in this chat, I'm going to get a little more political than I normally do. If you know me, I'm not really a very political person, but it's hard because it's the topic I know a lot about, and there's been a lot of misinformation out there, and that bothers me, the politicization of immigration.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the border wall, in my opinion, is a large waste of money because it is very rare, in my experience, that anyone comes into the U.S. right now without being stopped. And the main reason for that is because the Obama administration greatly increased the number of officers, CBP officers at the border. And also there's more technology used than it used to be. So really no one is coming to the U.S. without being stopped. So in my opinion, a border wall is a huge waste of money. But it doesn't stop it from being a political issue. So the next one, as we see, refugee and travel bans. The travel bans, primarily for people from Muslim countries, became a big topic for a while. And so basically, as you know, the Trump administration announced a number of countries. This happened on 2 different occasions. People were from those countries, they weren't going to be able to travel to the U.S. For a little while, that also included permanent residents, but then that part of it was repealed. So it doesn't include people who are permanent residents, and this part actually has been upheld to some degree. But as we see, it's enforcement of that slowed down a little bit, but we can get into more discussions on that. Refugee ban also, that's something where the U.S. for a little bit was not receiving any refugees. Now, we are receiving refugees now, but the number is way down from what it was under previous administrations. So another one is sanctioning sanctuary cities. And we can get into this in more detail as well, but Trump mentioned that any cities that were, that designated themselves as sanctuary cities, and a sanctuary city, if they designate themselves as sanctuary cities, that the administration was going to hold back federal funds for those cities, whether it be for bridges or roads or what have you, social services. But when it comes to sanctuary cities, a sanctuary city is a city that doesn't mean that they don't prosecute people who commit crimes. It just means that for people who commit crimes, they're not going to turn them over to ICE. Or if the police know someone's undocumented or they suspect it, they're not going to issue an ICE detainer to put them in the hands of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And as we've seen with sanctuary cities, that's, I don't know if we get into, no, we don't actually get into the decision on this, but recently a judge in California actually ruled that that sanctioning a sanctuary city and holding federal funds was unconstitutional.
So that's January.
Yeah. So January 2017 was a very busy month.
Yeah.
For a lot of people for our immigrant community, as well as people who work with the immigrant community, we were very busy last year in January. But a lot of these policies are still in effect, and we're seeing that how they are affecting immigration right now as well. So anyway, we'll keep going. Okay. In February, ending of enforcement priorities. That's a big one. Sometimes we talk about the border wall, and a lot of these changes are on something called an invisible wall. It's not a physical wall, but it's a number of changes that have made it more difficult for someone to come to the U.S. or to maintain their immigration status here in the U.S. So that's something that we're going to be discussing more of as we go on. But with ending enforcement priorities, the Obama administration established a number of priorities for ICE to initiate removal proceedings in someone. Basically, the priorities were if the person was a recent entrant to the United States, or if the person had a criminal record, for example, then they were considered what is an enforcement priority. Basically, ICE knows they only have limited resources to deport people. You can't deport 11 million people. It's just not possible. And so under the Obama administration, they focused their enforcement on people who, according to immigration, were a security risk or had just arrived into the U.S. But the Trump administration canceled enforcement priorities, so basically saying that everyone is fair game, which led to people when they went into their ICE check-ins or showed up for an appointment with immigration, sometimes they were detained because ICE knew where those people were. And in my opinion, that makes the community less safe because you're not targeting the people who committed crime. Mm-hmm. You're targeting any undocumented immigrant in the U.S. So that's my opinion on that one.
All right, moving on.
Okay, so if you follow immigration, USCIS, and ICE on social media, you've gotten to see a lot more propaganda lately. The BAHA, that is Buy American, High American, which is an initiative that immigration has been enforcing, or at least has been promoting. And in the beginning, this was a lot just social media propaganda. We've actually seen it come into play more. There's been more enforcement of this. But in my opinion, with the social media campaign, the Trump administration has done a lot of work in defaming the immigrant community. By the way, they've painted the immigrant community as criminals, which is something that we'll get into more, and also something that Trump said a lot during the campaign. In my opinion, it's defamation of the immigrant community, and that's something that affects me as someone who works a lot with the immigrant community. So we can move on. Okay. So as we've seen, ICE has arrested more immigrants. In the beginning, there were more arrests, but less deportations. We had more and more people that were being detained by immigration. And in June of 2017, one thing that we've noticed as immigration professionals is that USCIS, for example, keeps changing their immigration forms. And it's hard to keep up, especially for someone who doesn't do immigration all the time. It's hard to keep up with these changing forms. The forms have gotten longer and longer. They've gotten more complicated. And as you keep changing them, older forms expire. And as we've seen previously, the last edition of the form would also be accepted. But now immigration in most situations only accepts the current form, which makes it difficult to prepare applications and send them out and keep up to date. So September of last year, we also, and this really has happened over the course of 2017, but we've noticed more, starting really in September of last year, a major decrease in the number of refugees we've allowed into the U.S., which in my opinion, the U.S. has always been, I keep saying in my opinion a lot. I'm going to keep saying it. Sorry. Yeah. Well, a lot of this is factual, but I try to make a break from what I'm saying that's factual in my opinion. But the U.S. has always been a nation of immigrants, and as we've seen, this happen as well last year, is that USCIS removed a nation of immigrants from its motto. And so, and it's become more of a focus on serving the immigrant community, serving the United States, and what it needs, and not what its immigrant community needs. So that's something, it's a bit of a change that we've noticed across the board when it comes to dealing with immigration. So a major change that we've seen was the end of Daca, as well as the end of Daca advanced parole. So advanced parole is basically a travel permit that people who are in the U.S. with some type of immigration status, whether it be Daca or pending adjustment of status, to be able to request a travel permit to travel outside the U.S. for an important reason. And Trump announced the end of Daca and both at Daca advanced parole. And this is something that's, we'll get into what's happening with that now in just a minute, but it meant that there were, I think, 800,000 people who were on, who had DACA in the U.S., and it meant that they wouldn't be able to continue renewing their DACA status, which provides a work permit and protection from deportation. So because 2017 had been so busy up to that point, Trump decided that he would go golfing for the rest of the year, and so that's why nothing else happened in the rest of 2017, at least that we're going to cover today. But we'll go ahead and move on to 2018.
Okay. So starting with TPS.
Okay, great. So TPS was something, this is something that's happened over several months, where Trump announced that he was going to not continue TPS program. TPS is temporary protected status. It is a status specific to people from certain countries that are designated. There's about 10 countries right now, and these are countries where the home country has gone through civil war, some type of natural disaster. Haiti is an example of a country that has had TPS because of the hurricane that hit the country. And Trump has shown that he doesn't really believe in TPS, and so when countries have come up for renewal, in general, he's decided not to continue them. And January was when he announced that El Salvador would not be continued. And there's over 200,000 people in the U.S. From El Salvador who have TPS. That was a big one. Haiti was also announced he wasn't going to continue. There have been several that Trump has announced wouldn't be able to continue renewing their TPS, which included a work permit. Mm-hmm. So in January, these in red right here are situations where a judge ruled against something that Trump did. And there's a lot more of these. We're just covering a couple of the main ones. But the judge ruled, I believe it was in California, that the first one, that DACA would have to continue, that the Trump administration ending DACA the way it was done was unconstitutional. And so soon after that, USCIS began accepting DACA renewal applications, not initial applications, but renewal applications. Advanced parole would not go back into effect, but a lot of people were able to file for DACA. We've seen that, we have people walking by and waving hi. We've seen that that a lot of people have been able to renew their DACA applications. There's been a lot of court cases about DACA, and DACA is still up in the air. I'd recommend checking out our website. We have a lot of great information on DACA. We're going to continue to update that. And I do recommend that if your DACA expires anytime in the next 8 to 10 months, I would go ahead and renew DACA because we don't really know what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, April.
So we move on to April of this year, and we've seen a lot of things involving removal going on. And actually, the next two kind of go hand in hand. We have the Trump administration establishing removal quotas on immigration judges, basically saying that immigration judges needed to remove a certain amount of people per month or per year, per quarter, from their docket. So that's putting a lot of pressure on immigration judges to order removal, as well as we've seen Jeff Sessions overrule immigration judges who granted some type of immigration relief, and even removing immigration judges who didn't rule in a way he wanted them to. So we're definitely seeing how the executive branch is kind of enforcing judges to rule in a certain way, which is a scary prospect. So the next one is a big topic, and I think we've been talking a lot about this year about families being separated at the border, and children being separated from their parents is the big issue. And there's been a lot of images about that. It became a political issue as well. It's a really sad situation. In my opinion, a lot of that came from the zero tolerance policy at the border, where the Trump administration said they were going to prosecute every single person who tried to come into the U.S. rather than the catch and release type thing that was done. So we have more people being stopped, being detained, who are coming to the border, and then as an enforcement mechanism, in a lot of cases, children were separated from their families. Now, the administration will tell you they did that for other reasons, or it wasn't intentional, and it was in situations when the parents couldn't prove it was their child. But and it's something where we've seen the way immigration law being enforced has really tried to deter people from coming into the U.S. And so it's just a really sad situation that's led to very difficult problems, and we'll get into more, in my opinion, on that in a minute. So in June, there were some announced changes to H-1B process, and it basically made it easier for an immigration officer to deny an H-1B application. Also, H-1B filings, there was a really big backlog on these, and people who were filing for H-1B were allowed to pay an expedited processing. It's actually one of the rare situations where you can pay to have something processed faster as H-1B applications. But they were so far behind that they had to refund millions of dollars on processing fees because they weren't able to keep up with the immigration processing, the rapid processing of cases. So that's just showing you government waste of money. But moving on.
Okay, for July and asylum.
Okay, so there was an announcement in July of this year, just recently, about removing domestic violence and gang violence as qualifying factors for an asylum application. So basically saying that if you were a victim of domestic violence or asylum, or gang violence, that wouldn't be a qualifying factor in applying for asylum. Now, asylum is very difficult anyway, and just because you're a victim of domestic violence does not in any way give you asylum. It's a long process. We have to show that you have fear of persecution in your home country by being a member of a group of people who receives a lot of, who's a victim for in the home country, and it's very likely or very probable that you could be victimized again if you return to your home country. And the approval rates on asylum are extremely low. In some courts, less than 5% of cases are approved. But still, the idea of taking away someone who was a victim of domestic violence or gang violence in their home country as a qualifying factor in applying for asylum is still a scary prospect, because as we've seen in a lot of cases, people who are subject to persecution come to the U.S., fleeing that persecution, and are sent back to their country are oftentimes victims of continued persecution or even worse. It's a really sad situation seeing that happen. So in September, we're just a month ago, there were a couple of changes that affect immigration applications. One of them is that immigration there was a memo saying that immigration officers reviewing cases could deny cases rather than sending a request for evidence. So if not all of your application was sent with all the supporting document, instead of sending a request for additional evidence, the officers could just outright deny your case. Another one that we've seen is the public charge proposal. And this has actually hit some headlines on this, basically saying that there's been some miscommunication about this, but there's a memo basically saying that if you have minor children that received food stamps or Medicaid, that you could be denied an immigration benefit, permanent residence, for example, under the public charge category, basically saying that the officer thinks you may be a public charge based on the fact that your kids have food stamps or Medicaid. Now, an officer always could deny a case based on a public charge, but they're basically expanding the definition of what could be a public charge by including people whose kids receive means-tested benefits.
Okay.
Well, here we are in October, and so one kind of scary change that is I haven't seen yet, but has gone into effect in October, is that after denial of an application for permanent residence, for example, immigration can put your case into removal proceedings. Previously, immigration did not put you in removal proceedings if you filed for an application that was denied, even if it was immigration's fault in denying the application. But now we're seeing how USCIS, that's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, used to consider themselves the friendly face of immigration. They're the ones who approved work permits and permanent residence and citizenship, kind of the happy side of immigration. We're seeing how are working more closely with ICE in deportations. Now, it's still rare, but it's possible that if you file an application and it is denied, your case could be sent to ICE for a deportation process. Okay, so with fee waivers limited, we've noticed that it's harder now to get a fee waiver. There have been a couple of announcements about this, and this is kind of new, but basically saying that immigration is limiting when they're offering a fee waiver. And basically the most recent proposal is they're going to eliminate someone receives means-tested benefit, that they can apply for a fee waiver on the immigration fees. So we just received last week a ruling on TPS. Basically, the judge in California said that for 4 of the countries who Trump had announced TPS would end, that they are now able to, that immigration is going to have to continue renewing their TPS, at least temporarily. That's just a preliminary injunction, and we'll see what happens on that. Okay, so I kind of wanted to cover some of the effects of this, and before I do that, I want to check just to see if we have any questions so far for us to cover. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, my name is Jeremy Love. It's a pleasure to be with you. We have Julie Hand, our paralegal, with us today at the Love Immigration Law Firm here in Hoover, Alabama. It's a very cloudy day today, but it's still a pleasure to be here. And so yeah, I don't have any questions yet, but we'll do our best to answer these as soon as we're off. But in my opinion, there have been a number of effects of this enforcement that the Trump administration and the changes they've made in immigration. And I think that it's kind of causes a chilling effect on filing applications. Basically, people who are eligible for certain government benefits are going to be afraid to do so if they know their information may be shared with ICE if their case is denied. I think it also creates a little bit of a mistrust with law enforcement. It's making it harder to get people to report crimes, which makes our communities less safe, in my opinion, as well. And I think that we've seen this immigrants feel less welcome in the U.S., unfortunately, with the focus on immigration, as well as the social media propaganda we've seen from the federal government against the immigrant community. I think it's really disparaging, and it's it's unfortunate, in my opinion. So kind of in conclusion, I think it's important to follow reliable media sources on immigration. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and with immigration, the law is always changing. That's why I think it's very important that you only hire someone who's an expert on immigration, someone who has a lot of experience in the type of case that you have, because a little small change, a little small difference in your case can make your case completely different than someone else that you may know. Okay. So feel free to contact us. Phone number is right here as well. We have a lot of great information on our website, loveimmigration.com. We've actually just recently updated it. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure. We'll be back hopefully soon with another topic. And let us know what you'd like to hear about, because it'd be great for us to answer any questions that you may have and cover topics that you're interested in hearing about.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.